For privacy reasons, the names of individuals involved in this case have been changed. Stay tuned. A night of terror. A small cabin in the middle of the woods. On the morning of April 12, 1981, in a peaceful town, a horrifying scene was discovered inside cabin 28. 3 people were brutally murdered. A little girl mysteriously disappeared, and haunting traces were at the scene. There were no signs of forced entry, and no witnesses saw the killer, but fear covered the entire area. The investigation lasted for decades, with scattered clues and mysterious suspects. However, the killer still roamed in the dark. Was this case a conspiracy that had been covered up? What really happened that fateful night? The bloody mystery of Cabin 28. What truth is buried? Where every unsolved mystery contains secrets that want to be revealed. Step into the darkness and explore them with us. Don't hesitate to leave a like as an encouragement for us. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to update the most classic cases. This small resort, nestled deep in the woods of Plumas County, California, was once a peaceful place that attracted families looking to escape the hustle and bustle of the city and enjoy the fresh mountain air. The simple wooden houses, the picturesque natural scenery, and the small but friendly community made it an ideal destination for those seeking peace. However, on the night of April 11, 1981, the tranquility of the area was shattered by a horrific crime. Cabin 28, home to a small family, became the scene of one of the most brutal and mysterious murders in American history. 3 people were brutally murdered. A little girl disappeared without a trace, and the haunting traces left behind made even seasoned investigators shudder. Although the case occurred more than 4 decades ago, questions remain. Who was responsible for that fateful night? What was the real motive? And why has the case dragged on for decades without a solution? On the fateful morning of April 12, 1981, Lindsay Carter, a 14-year-old girl, returned home after spending the night at a friend's house. There was no sign of anything unusual when she entered cabin number 28. But as soon as she opened the living room door, Lindsay immediately fell into a state of extreme panic. Before her eyes was a horrifying scene that no child should have to witness. The bodies of her mother, Karen Carter, 36, her brother, Jason Carter, 15, and Jason's friend, Eric Nolan, 17, lying on the floor, brutally murdered. Karen Carter, a single mother of 5, had her hands tied with an electrical cord, her mouth covered with duct tape and a towel. The wounds on her body showed that she had been stabbed repeatedly in the chest, and her throat was deeply slit, causing her death to come in a brutal manner. Jason Carter, her 15-year-old son, did not escape the tragic fate. His head had been hit hard with a blunt object, fracturing his skull. Evidence suggested that Jason may have tried to fight back, but had no chance against his killer. Eric Nolan, Jason's best friend, had been strangled to death, and like Jason, his head had been hit hard. All 3 victims had been tied up with electrical cords and duct tape, suggesting that the murders had been planned and executed in an organized manner. What puzzled the police was that in the bedroom next door, Karen Carter's 3 other children, Ryan, 10, Alex, 5, and Jordan Miller, 12, were still sleeping soundly and completely unharmed. They had no idea that a horrific massacre had taken place in their own home. When police arrived at Cabin 28, they found some important evidence, but unfortunately, it was not enough to accurately identify the killer. The murder weapons included a bloody knife was found near the victims' bodies. Marks on the blade indicated that it had been used multiple times for stabbing, especially in the murder of Karen Carter. A bent hunting knife, which indicated that it had struck a bone or some other hard object during the murder. A blood-stained hammer, which may have been the weapon used to strike Jason Carter and Eric Nolan in the head, causing severe injuries to their skulls. A gun was also found at the scene, but no bullets were fired. This suggests that the killer may have brought a gun to threaten the victims, but did not use it to kill them. Strangely, There were no signs of forced entry at the scene. No broken windows, no broken locks. This led investigators to believe that the perpetrator was likely someone the family knew, or at least someone the victim did not suspect when they entered the cabin. In addition, there were no strange footprints outside the house, but there were some bloodstains that were dragged, which could indicate that the perpetrator moved the victim or that he himself was injured during the crime. Despite the presence of important evidence, the investigation was marred by a series of serious errors that made the case difficult to solve. Despite the presence of important evidence, the investigation was marred by a series of serious errors that made the case difficult to solve. Some traces were lost or not properly preserved, making it impossible for forensic experts to analyze them later. The police did not immediately seal off the scene, allowing multiple people to enter and exit the cabin, disturbing important evidence. Bloodstains and fingerprints were not properly processed, and much biological evidence was contaminated or invalidated over time. Important statements from neighbors and residents in the area were ignored, causing the police to lose many clues that could have helped identify the suspect. All these mistakes caused the massacre at Cabin 28 to fall into a deadlock, and to this day, the identity of the killer remains a bloody mystery without an answer. 3 years after the horrific massacre at Cabin 28, a chilling development has raised new hopes in the investigation, but also left a host of unanswered questions. On April 22, 1984, a group of campers in the Feather Falls area of Camp 18, about 100 miles from the cabin, stumbled upon a skull and several fragments of bones scattered on the damp ground. At first, they thought they were animal bones, but upon closer inspection, they realized they might be the remains of a child. Immediately, the police and forensics team were called. After collecting samples and analyzing them, investigators confirmed that the remains belonged to Emma Carter, the 12-year-old girl who had gone missing the night of the massacre. This was a huge shock to the Carter family and investigators, as no one understood why Emma's body appeared so far away from the original scene. Finding Emma's body in a completely different location led the police to come up with a number of theories. The killer kidnapped Emma that night, then held her and murdered her in another location before dumping her body at Camp 18. Emma may have tried to flee after witnessing the massacre, but was killed on the way. A more terrifying theory is that Emma was murdered that night at the cabin, but the killer returned to the scene later to move her body to distract the investigation. It is worth noting that the area where Emma's body was found is extremely remote. Only people who are familiar with the terrain or know the area well can move there without being detected. This led investigators to believe that the killer may have been a local or had lived near the Feather Falls area. Although Emma's remains were found, police were still unable to determine the exact cause of her death. Due to the passage of time, many important pieces of evidence on the bones had decomposed, making it impossible for forensic experts to determine whether Emma had been murdered with a weapon. Who took Emma so far away? Was she killed the night after the massacre? Or was she held captive for some time before she was murdered? Was there other evidence left behind in the Camp 18 area? While this discovery added another piece to the mystery, it also raised more questions than it answered. Emma's body was an important clue, but the identity of the killer remained a mystery. Although the Cabin 28 massacre has become one of the most gruesome cases in American crime history, police have never formally charged anyone. During the decades long investigation, the two most prominent names that were considered suspects were Michael Reeves and Thomas Douglas. However, due to a lack of concrete evidence, neither was ever convicted. Michael Reeves was a neighbor of the Carter family and had a direct connection to the victims. In particular, his son, Jordan Miller, 12 years old, was one of 3 children who survived the cabin on the night of the murder. This detail has led many to question his involvement. Some important information in the investigation targeting Michael Reeves includes: his wife once testified that Michael had a deep hatred for Karen Carter, even expressing hatred for her on many occasions. During an argument, he once threatened to kill Karen. After the murder, a psychiatrist revealed that Michael had admitted to him in a therapy session
I killed Karen and Emma, but I didn't want it to happen.
This statement drew more attention to him from the police, but it was not considered an official confession because there was no other concrete evidence. There was no sign of forced entry into the cabin, which may indicate that the killer was someone known to the Carter family. Michael lived next door and could have easily approached the cabin without raising suspicion. Several witnesses also reported that Michael behaved strangely after the murder, appearing panicked, restless, and having sudden changes in behavior. Despite this, there was no DNA, fingerprints, or physical evidence linking Michael Reeves to the murders, making it impossible for the police to arrest him. Another suspect was Thomas Douglas, a man with a history of violent crimes and a close friend of Michael Reeves. Some information suggests that Douglas may have been with Michael on the night of the murder. Thomas Douglas has a history of assault and burglary, and according to some sources, he was near the cabin around the time of the murder. After the murder, Douglas left town abruptly, leading police to suspect his involvement. Some witnesses saw Douglas and Michael talking secretly in the days after the murder, but no one knows what the conversation was about. A hammer, similar to the murder weapon, was found in an area near where Douglas lived, but no forensic evidence has linked it to the murder. Although there are many suspicious points surrounding Michael Reeves and Thomas Douglas, the lack of concrete evidence has prevented police from bringing formal charges. Factors include, there were no traces of DNA or fingerprints at the scene. The testimony was speculative and not convincing enough in court. Physical evidence, such as the murder weapon and the crime scene, was mishandled, missing many important clues. So, although Michael Reeves and Thomas Douglas may be potential suspects, they are still at large. The identity of the real killer remains an unsolved mystery, making the Cabin 28 massacre one of the most haunting cases in American history. Although the Cabin 28 massacre shocked the public and brought many investigators to the case, over time, many people believed that the authorities did not really want to find the killer. The mysteries surrounding the investigation have led to many theories that the case may have involved underground forces or was covered up due to police errors from the beginning. Some suspicious details in the handling of the case include extremely poor crime scene preservation. Soon after the police arrived at the cabin, many important pieces of evidence were disturbed. Some officers did not follow the crime scene protection procedures, allowing too many people to enter and exit, causing traces to be lost or contaminated. Important evidence mysteriously evaporated. According to the case file, some pieces of evidence were collected, but then disappeared from the database. Among them were blood samples, some fingerprint evidence, and a mysterious phone call recording related to the case. Some police officers may have known the suspects. According to some independent investigators, Michael Reeves and Thomas Douglas may have had relationships with some local police officers, which may have affected the investigation. Inconsistencies in witness statements were not clarified. Some witnesses reported seeing strange men near the cabin on the night of the crime, but the police did not appear to pursue this lead seriously. The investigation gradually fell into disrepair. Although the case was so horrific that it attracted great media attention, after only a few years, the investigation was almost at a standstill. The case file made no significant progress. The suspects were not prosecuted, and the case was classified as unsolved without any further action from the authorities. These factors have led many independent investigators to believe that the police deliberately slowed or even obstructed the investigation. Some believe that there was a powerful force behind the case, perhaps criminal gangs or individuals with connections to local authorities, that prevented the case from ever coming to light. To this day, despite mounting evidence that the case may have been mishandled from the start, no one has been held accountable for these mistakes. Justice for the Carter family has yet to be served, and the deaths of the victims remain an unsolved mystery. Did the real killer escape undetected? Or was there a conspiracy to cover up the truth? What do you think of this case? Will justice ever be served? Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this story and want to dive deeper into more intriguing mysteries, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update.